everybody. Welcome to the November 16th, 2020 Troy City Council special meeting. I'll call this meeting to order and ask for the roll call. Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Abraham.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Here.
All present this evening. We first up on the agenda is public comment. We'll start with public comment this evening, which, as you know, while we're doing virtual meetings, can be submitted via email to publiccomment@troymi.gov or via voicemail to 248-524-3302. I will turn it over to City Clerk Dixon to read those into the record.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a few emails and 2 voicemails tonight. The first comment, good afternoon. My name is Eric Madigan, and I work for the Road Commission of Oakland County. As winter grows near, the Road Commission for Oakland County is seeking to hire part-time snowplow drivers to augment its reduced full-time staff. I was wondering if it's possible for you to advertise this flyer for anybody in your area that may be interested in the position. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Second comment, as a resident is from Kevin Shue. As a resident of Troy, I strongly oppose the 3-story townhomes project proposed by developer Safet Staffa at Crooks and Waddles. Although the land was designated as a neighborhood node zone, the developer's 74 units plan is too dense, not compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods, threatens the natural habitats for the wild animals in the area, and exacerbates the traffic congestion problem at the intersection. The people of Troy have voiced loudly and clearly over the past few years on the overdevelopment of the city. They want to preserve the green space and the natural beauty of the city. Too often when developers move in, the wildlife's habitat was destroyed and they had to roam into the neighborhoods. Coyotes are frequently observed in neighborhood streets and people's backyards. Also, there are more deadly accidents at major intersections in the city. Every time the consulting company said there was no substantial impact of the proposed development on the traffic, yet the reality experienced by people and the accidents happened are quite the opposite. The proposed development will make the majority of residents suffer and degrade the overall appeal of the city. I hope the Planning Committee and City Council can hear the voice and concerns of your fellow residents and make a wise decision. Next comment is from Rodney Curtis. Hello, City Council. Thank you for all your hard work and for allowing public comment on the future budget. Ever since the I-75 updates and improvements began, the sound levels in our little elbow crook of Troy have increased considerably. We reside in the square mile between Big Beaver and Waddles in Livernois and Rochester. The elevated traffic noise roar comes at us from the south, then curves around and hits us from the west. We know some noise barriers have already gone up, and that's a good thing. We would like to encourage even more mitigation to bring the echoing din back down. From Rodney and Marcy Curtis. The next comment is from Dave Lambert. As a member of the city's Green Space Subcommittee, I hope you will revisit that committee's report presented at the February 2019 special study session of the Troy City Council. Specifically, our recommendation to promote a 30-year dedicated millage for future park open green space enhancement, maintenance, and/or acquisition in lieu of a renewal of proposal A, B, and C bonds. Thank you for your time. And we have 2 voicemails.
Mr. Baker, Roger Walters. I love talking to you and the city council members because, you know, about a third of them are crooks anyway. That's my personal comment. Mr. Baker, I caught you about the speeding on Boyd Street. Once again, about the speed bump on our street. 2, they had to call International Academy and tell the woman, next time that one of her students there speed down our street, I'm going to call the Troy Police. Remember one thing, my backyard sits the parking lot of International Academy. So when you fly down this street, I know exactly who you are. So, Mr. Baker, do you think possibly that you could do your job just once? Just once. Okay? Excuse me. As a matter of fact, as a reminder, International Academy and Baker Junior High is located on Torpy Drive. It's not located on Boyd Street. It's located on Torpy Drive. So it's imperative that you clearly understand that, because obviously you don't. So I'm just going to ask you this again, is to make sure that the people use Torby Drive and stop speeding down our street. So I don't have to call the school and I don't have to call the police. Sitting behind my house in a police car doesn't do the job at all. How about being on Boyd Street and doing the job? That's what works. You have a great day. Just do your job. Just enforce the traffic. That's all you got to do, Mr. Baker. Okay? That's all you have to do.
Hello, this is Hannah Mullins again. I believe we should hold our elected officials and public servants accountable for their actions. I called last week to air my grievances and initially felt slightly dismissed. However, I want to thank Ms. Brooks for reaching out to me and having a conversation about my concerns, and look forward to having a conversation with Mr. Baker as well. Last time I called, my question was never answered but punted to Ms. Bloom, who has a very clear bias and took the opportunity to marginalize my concerns. During a conversation we had in August, she was condescending. She tried shaming me. I was called antagonistic towards my neighbors, was threatened with criminal charges, told me my speech was not constitutionally protected, and she attempted to weaponize judges by saying most judges are going to be white that would be hearing this matter, and they are probably going to have a similar opinion, all to instill fear and shame for standing up to the racism I have been experiencing. I now have a lawyer willing to represent me because the city attorney crossed the line. I know Ms. Bloom is significantly older than me and comes from a different generation, a generation where people of color were not allowed to speak up against such things without fear of retribution. But in 2020, we won't be quiet about it anymore. Don't expect me to sit idly by and take it on the chin while my neighbors continue to target me and my family for not tolerating their behavior. It's not antagonistic with Bloom, it's reactive. I didn't just wake up one day and decide what a different percentage just to piss people off. My family has had to deal with the cops visiting our home over half a dozen times since June. I also have police records proving these calls fallacious and harassment. As it stands, my neighbors can continue calling on me, exaggerating and lying in most cases without consequence, all while the city, who claims to be working towards race equity, while having staff with racial bias, claims to be addressing these issues fairly. As you can imagine, that doesn't feel fair to me. My ongoing unresolved issue aside, it does not address my concerns about neighbors abusing city resources to target neighbors they may or may not have a dispute with. I know the issue made the local news, but understand that the news did not tell the whole story. After the story aired, I had many local people reach out to me to share their support and their similar experiences. I had one woman reach out to tell me she fears taking walks because she wants to avoid negative interactions. It does not just affect me, it affects the community. It's easy to brush this off when you don't experience it, and it's clear some in City Council still don't get it, but I do appreciate those that do. I've lived in many places, Mississippi, California, Texas, New Mexico, South Carolina, and Japan, and I can honestly say I have never experienced what I'm currently dealing with in the city of Troy. You can dismiss it as a silly sign dispute, code violations, or simply being antagonistic, but it's a symptom of a residual problem. My family and I will not tolerate racism in any capacity, especially at our home. I'm not an activist. I'm just a resident that wants to live in peace, to not continue having my neighbors target and lie about my family without consequence. How does the city plan to address these type of nuisance calls?
That's all the public comment we have.
Okay, that concludes those that have participated in public comment this evening by leaving a voicemail at 248-524-3302 or or sending an email to publiccomment@troymi.gov. Typically, we have an opportunity to address public comment by council or city administration. I have a couple things to say, but anyone else like to say anything in response to public comment this evening to start out? City Manager Miller.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of council. Just really quick, I just wanted to reaffirm that the city engineer, in cooperation with other departments, is working on a speed bump program. And so that will be coming to city council in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to address Ms. Mullins' comments. Ms. Mullins, I know you had asked speak to the mayor or hope to speak to the mayor. I would also like to speak to you too. I'd like to understand the situation that you've been dealing with better, more than just what's been on the news. And I'm hoping you'll reach out to me. If you could email me your phone number, I would like to talk to you, because there is no place for racism in our city. And I say that unequivocally. And whatever your family's been going through, it should not be going through it. And whatever power council has to ameliorate the situation, I certainly want to explore that, because you're in a very untenable and unfair position. So I'd like to find out more, talking to you directly, and hopefully we can get this on the path to a resolution.
Thanks, Edna. Anyone, Councilmember Brooks, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, excuse me. Oh, we can't hear you, Teresa.
Directly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, okay. Sorry, it was frozen for a little bit. Oh no, I did reach out and speak with Ms. Mullins directly. And I agree. I do understand her concerns as far as especially the nuisance calls, and so that I would try to potentially reach out to Chief Nastasi and see if there's any way to potentially deter some nuisance calls that come in, because I do know that it is a use of taxpayer money and resources when calls are made that are not necessarily substantiated or necessary. Obviously we don't support racism in any capacity, not as a council, not as a city. And so we will try to figure out, the best way to move forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks. Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga.
Thank you, Mayor. I also want to reach out to Ms. Mullins and just first of all say, I am so sorry for what you are experiencing. You are a veteran. Thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for living here in Troy. I live on Witherby Drive, which is not very far from Brook Lawn, and would be happy to walk over at any point and have a conversation and just listen and learn more about what you're experiencing. I know I'm in the abutting neighborhood, so it's not the same as some of the, I don't know all the neighbors in your own neighborhood, but would be happy to listen and learn. So I look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga. City Attorney Bloom.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to say that although I was accused of marginalizing Ms. Mullins' complaints, I hope that I did not give that impression. I'm not marginalizing her complaints. I do think that if in fact city resources are being used inappropriately, I'm happy to help with that. I do, however, want to indicate that there is still an investigation in this matter. So my comments are going to be limited at this point in time because I don't know where that's going to go. But again, to the extent that Ms. Mullins felt marginalized, I'm sorry for that. That was certainly not the intent.
Thank you, City Attorney Bloom. Anyone else on council? I'll go through a couple. As it relates to, I'm sorry, Councilmember Hoderick.
Just wanted to say, in general, we do try to really set a tone in this community, and our police department has been tremendous in trying to facilitate that. They've worked to have community conversations that I've been involved with over the years, and I really do want this resident who has called in with these issues and any resident who's listening to know that we take this very seriously. So I echo the comments of my fellow council members, and of course, I really do want to understand anyone feeling marginalized in a situation. That's not the kind of community we want to have. So anything we can do to work to a resolution for everyone involved to take down the temperature, get that neighborhood feeling back to neighborly. And this resident in particular, she is clearly feeling as if she's not being heard, but we are hearing, and we will listen and work it through. And, I've just been here for years and watched the embracing of diversity overall and throughout the community, and we'll follow through on this. We can promise you that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Anyone else? Before we get to our other issues this evening. Well, so as for Ms. Mullins goes, I did have some communications with her, and I'll be meeting with her later this week to talk about her concerns. And obviously, I think I said our last meeting, I am aware of some of the issues because I've heard from several of her neighbors. I haven't had the opportunity to speak directly with her. And listen, being a representative of the city, we are representing a large group of residents. Part of our job is to hear from all sides and all issues, and do what we can to help. As far as any issues of racism, it's been well said by my fellow council members that obviously we don't condone or support, encourage, or intend to have any policy that looks like it promotes racism or does anything to marginalize anybody. And we'll look into our internal policies and procedures if necessary, and any issues, and deal with that as we would any matter related to such an issue. And I want to make the public know that we definitely take these things seriously, and we'll do what we need to do to make sure they're addressed. As City Attorney Bloom said, certain things may be still under investigation, so we often get limited as to what we can talk about. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that in last week's call, Ms. Mullins did indicate that the police department has been very professional, and that the nuisance calls, as she's referring to them, are a nuisance because they're happening, not so much the way they're being handled from our police department. I know our police department has worked very, very hard, and they've been out there a lot in that neighborhood because of the issues related to the signs and Ms. Mullins and her neighbors. And it's been a tough situation for that neighborhood, but we hope that we can work through it and have a good resolution and have some good conversations to figure out what needs to be done. So Ms. Mullins, I look forward to talking with you later this week. And if you're watching and you need help connecting with any other council members, obviously all of our emails are provided and phone numbers as well, but I can help coordinate that as well. A couple other quick comments related to the public comment. Mr. Shue, who left the message regarding the Crooks townhomes, obviously that was a planning commission issue, and it's not actually coming before city council. I know that was dealt with in the planning commission meeting last week, but your comments regarding wildlife and safety and density are well heard by this council, and certainly as we move forward with our master plan revisions and all the conversations related to that, we will definitely keep your comments in mind. So thank you for that. Mr. and Mrs. Curtis, relating to the sound levels from I-75, we certainly hear that throughout the community from different neighborhoods. Mr. Miller, I'm not sure specifically if you know anything about that neighborhood. I know that obviously the city of Troy isn't dealing specifically with sound wall issues and such, but we can coordinate Mr. Curtis with the right people at MDOT, or perhaps somebody, maybe Bill Hootery, could reach out to Mr. Curtis to see if there's anything he can do to connect them. Would that be possible?
Yes, Mayor, and that's the correct person, Bill Hootery, our city engineer.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Lambert, yes, I saw something you posted on social media also about the Green Space Committee subcommittee recommendations, and we'll definitely be taking that under guidance as we look through the budget issues tonight and 2 weeks from now and throughout the rest of the year and into next year, actually. So thank you for reminding us of that. I actually need to pull that report back up and take a good look over that, I think. And if other council members who weren't on council then, it might be nice if we could have that sent to us, City Manager Miller, just as a refresher, or at least pointed in the direction of where it would be on the website. And Mr. Walters, again, thank you for your passion regarding speed bumps. No one likes speeders in our city. You do live by a school, understanding that there's a lot of traffic through there. As Mr. Miller said, we are looking into a speed bump policy, and it will be coming before us, which is good news, so we can address it that way. Do encourage, again, anyone who feels that there's reckless driving on their street, you can always reach out to the Troy PD. That's what they're there for as it relates to that. So never hesitate to do that. But thank you again for bringing that to our attention, and we'll keep on it. And hopefully with a new policy, we can address it further in the future. Okay, so that concludes response to public comment this evening. We'll move on to the business state and the special meeting notice. We only have one agenda item this evening. It's D1, budget strategies. It's my understanding that I'll be turning it over to City Manager Miller, Assistant City Manager Bruner, and CFO Malzik to go through some budget presentation, some slides, some numbers, some graphs, I'm sure. There'll be some opportunities for us to questions as we go along. There'll be opportunity for us to provide input as to budget priorities from what we see as representatives of the residents of the city. And my expectation is that at the end of this evening, we'll have given maybe some additional things to research or some thoughts for city management to look into. And recognizing that we'll meet again in 2 weeks with another session like this, where there will be some specific items brought to us, but always giving us ample opportunity to bring forward what we think our budget priorities should be. And so we'll facilitate that discussion after the presentation, but in the meantime, I'll turn it over to City Manager Miller to have his team take over.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and the rest of council. IT, could you please bring up the presentation? Okay, first of all, I want to thank staff, Assistant City Manager Bob Bruner and Chief Financial Officer. I was a little disorientated by the screen. Sorry, I apologize. Rob Malzik. And also I want to thank Stephanie Flesher in our office and Sarah Ames for working behind the scenes. And I want to thank council for scheduling this meeting. 2 meetings, actually. I know I was getting ribbed a little bit because we're meeting a few weeks in a row, but staff really, really needs this input. I do too, but you'd be surprised how in programming and spending the people's dollars, staff take that as a very serious responsibility, and your input in city council is critical to that. Thank you very much. So I just want to talk a little bit about we're in the middle of COVID-19. We all have to work and play and work and do things differently, sacrifice a little bit. This is not the best way for us to interact regarding the budget. And let me kind of give you a quick story about like how we all have to do things differently. For those of you who don't know, my son is a senior at Michigan State University and he plays on the hockey team. And the team got together. They're finally going to have a season starting this Thursday. There were some cases early on and they have settled. And my son now gets tested once a day as part of the hockey team in the athletic department. And my wife is like, oh, go, Tommy, you can come to Thanksgiving dinner. And he's then kind of says, well, I really would like to do that. But if I were to get him to get COVID, the whole team would be shut down. And I just have a responsibility to my team and I can't do that. And one, it showed that we were a little selfish that we wanted to see him. But my point is he has to do things differently to try to move his goals along like all of us. So thank you for doing this in this kind of strange way that we're doing it. Next slide, please. IT, next slide, please. Okay, the job of city management and our staff is not to tell council what to do, but our job is to work with council and to help council make decisions for their common goals. And in that process, there's robust discussion with council and with the community. And it's critical that we get that input from our residents. And we as staff have to do this dispassionately in basically presenting the facts to council and try to help council develop where to move forward and how to move forward. The fact is today, city council is bound by earlier decisions by city council. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. Previous city councils decided to have a landfill off of South Boulevard and expand those landfills and actually buy one of them and then eventually develop Sanctuary Lake Golf Course. Well, this council and staff is stuck with that decision and we will talk a little bit about the consequences of that. A second example is that in 2002, one of the bond proposals were to help in the Parks and Recreation arena. And because of that, we now have 11 undeveloped parks. A lot of people don't realize that. None of these undeveloped parks are in our capital plan for development at this time, because the capital fund has so many needs. Also, the Great Recession included dramatic cuts in employees and services. You know, at the time we looked at retirement, layoffs, privatization, regionalization, the reduction of services, and that has impact on what we're doing today. Also, we'll point out that our main revenue source, property taxes, is eroding every year by Headley and Prop A. You know, finally, I just like to say the budget really doesn't have a lot of wiggle room as it stands right now. Next slide, please. Oh, I apologize. Can you go back? I want to summarize that slide. Can you go back, please? I apologize. No, backwards.
Not sure you should go back, Mark. It was kind of scary. Let's move forward. Positive forward talk. Can we do that?
I apologize. But so basically, the slides that we're unable to get back to, basically outline what we're going to try to address in this presentation, and really, and what we're going to do is, Rob is going to outline the funds, and just leave this slide. Rob will take over right here. And then Bob will talk about residential taxes. Rob will come back and talk about threats. Then Bob will talk about Headley and Prop A a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about COVID and the unknowns. Rob will talk a little bit about legacy costs. And then we'll finish out the presentation with opportunities, which I'll present. And then Bob will kind of outline where we are with community engagement in the survey, and then we'll get to City Council to have for questions and answers. But there will be pause points where Council can ask questions of staff. I'm a big believer in that, but also I don't want to get bogged down during the middle of the presentation. So if we do have questions, let's make them short so we can keep moving on. So right now, I'll turn this over to Rob to kind of go over all of our different funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. All right, so I know this is a very busy slide, and it's also, I know it's numbers that you've seen before because it's in the 2021 budget. But what I wanted to do was give it a little bit different of an understanding for this presentation. If you look at the 4 columns on the left, those are governmental funds, and those four types of funds are basically driven by taxes. The 2 funds on the right-hand side, enterprise and internal service, are basically based upon fee driven. So those are a little bit of the differences. But if we start with the general fund, and you'll see an overall budget of 179 million, the general fund 67 million, and encompasses everything that's left over that isn't encompassed in the other 5 funds to the right. One thing I wanted to point out was public safety is over 50%, which makes sense for a city of our size and stature. If you look at also recreation and culture, that's $8.4 million, and that includes basically a split between our parks and our recreation. And so many cities will break that out and put that into the special revenue fund section and have a millage to support that. Not that I'm saying that you should do that, but I just wanted to give you an idea that that's something that's out of the status quo of what Troy's done. An example of this is the library many years ago was in the general fund, and it was split out into a special revenue fund, and obviously recently just got reapproved. So I just wanted to point that out. And then also the $1 million at the very bottom, other uses, that's $1 million that is being contributed to the capital projects fund to help support a local road as an example. If we move on to special revenue funds, the second column, special revenue funds have a definition that's they are used to account for specific revenues that are legally restricted to expenditures for particular purposes. So as an example, major streets and local streets are funded through Act 51. And so we get those revenues from the state. As of now, I talked to Bill Hootery today, and he doesn't want to give out any PASER rating data yet because we'll be getting new PASER rating data in end of December into January. But what I wanted to comment is as of now, there's really no threat to that funding level because the state's actually improved our funding level to all-time highs. The threat may come in if there's an issue with COVID, that the $600 million that's now being given into those funds is discretionary, and the state may decide to, on the backs of the locals again, balance their budget. Also, I wanted to mention, going down that column, refuse fund is also another major, is a big fund within the special revenue funds, and that's supported by a millage of 1.09 mils. And that one we don't have much concern about financially as well, because what happens is we actually are allowed to levy up to 2.4 mils there. So we have plenty of room. There's no Headley issues there. There's nothing of concern there. And that's been a very, very consistent use of our millage rate. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, there's some smaller ones in there, but the library, and as you are all aware, that library funding will increase in 2022's budget, and that's a special revenue fund as well. If you move over to the debt service funds column, you'll see there's Prop A, B, and C. Those are all different proposals that were put in, and in next year's slide, they would all go away because this debt is expiring. And so what's left is the DDA debt, which all of you are aware, it just got refinanced. We worked hard on that to get some cost savings for the city. And with the DDA's bond, I know Council Member Chamberlain Criango was on that DDA for a long time, and Mayor Baker's on it now. And that DDA, with that savings from that, from the refinancing, we'll be able to fund additional projects that your board will obviously approve. The next column is a capital projects fund, and that's $16.8 million. But if you look at it, only $7.1 million comes from the actual taxes. And so the rest of the money comes from these other funds, such as the special revenue fund, such as the general fund, et cetera, because we have more capital needs than what our millage rate will hold. So as an example, transfers in this year in this budget were $4.7 million from major roads, 1.8 from local roads, in the general fund of $1 million. So that's why we had in this budget $16.8 million, but only 7.1 is coming from the tax rate. Moving on to enterprise funds, we have 5 enterprise funds. The 2 golf courses, and we're going to talk a lot more about Sanctuary Lake later. The aquatic center, which this board has talked a lot about in the recent months, and then the water and sewer funds. Wanted to point out about the water and sewer funds, Troy is very uniquely placed in that there's no debt outstanding in the sewer and water funds. So the people that came before us have done a great job to build in all improvements and construction into those rates over time. And so we're very blessed with a low water rate. And then lastly, the internal service funds, again, they're all internal and they're an accounting mechanism to spread out costs. Our biggest one is the fleet maintenance. And that is when we have, as an example, police cars, we purchase those and then allocate those out to the police department from the general fund. So, and maybe it's something more practical to you guys would be on the IT. Everyone of you is assigned a computer, and then we allocate costs to the general fund into the council department for the use of that computer and the cost of all the support that goes along with that. So on an overall basis, that's our financial structure. And again, it's done through the 6 types of funds, 4 on the left being governmental, two on the right, and the actual word for that is proprietary funds. Moving on, next slide, please. A little more about general revenue sources. Our taxes, we'll be talking a lot about the taxes, but that's our biggest revenue source at 55%. State shared revenues are next at almost 13%, over 8 million. And, you know, when you think about COVID, we've talked a lot about this at previous council meetings. So far, we're okay, but again, with another lockdown, the state shared revenue could be an issue. The state also is famous for doing unfunded mandates, so we never know when another unfunded mandate may hit our organization. Charges for services, again, another big portion of that. And when you break that down, you know, we have recreation's the biggest portion of that at $3 million. Other sources, which is unique to us, is because we, in the general fund, have all the DPW costs for the local and major roads. We allocate that out and we get revenue in from those two funds. And that totals about 5 million of the 5.3 million in this year. And the rest fall into place. If you notice the last item, federal, state, and local grants, we had budgeted almost nothing. And as of today, we have 1.7 million in the bank from grants from the federal the CARES Act. And we're approximating at least $4 million in revenue in that line item for this year. And you'll see that in budget amendments coming in the next month or so. Next slide, please. Now, you guys are very familiar with this item. I talked about the revenue side of the Capital Projects Fund. You've seen this slide. It was in our budget presentation 6 months ago. The point I want to get across with this is that you can see that the Capital Projects Fund accumulates a lot of cost and a lot of different projects from many different departments. You have major streets and local streets being the main thing, but you can see public safety there, public works. Next slide. The library, parks, city buildings, historic village, et cetera. So it's really very, very encompassing what we cover within the Capital Projects Fund. And just to understand the Capital Projects Fund a little bit better, we use this as an accounting mechanism to accumulate anything that's going to end up in our fixed asset system. So this is why the library, we do an intercompany transfer. Library's got 595 in capital there. And the Capital Project Fund gets reimbursed for that expenditure from the library, as an example. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Bob for residential taxes, unless someone has a question or two.
Anybody on council have any quick questions? Not seeing any hands. Thank you, Bob. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to talk about everybody's favorite topic, taxes. Taxes are the result of simple mathematic operations involving two numbers. And we're going to talk a lot about these two numbers tonight, taxable value and tax rates. And we're going to use this section of the presentation to use residential values and rates to illustrate this point. Next slide, please. This chart shows the average taxable value of residential properties in Troy from 2004 to 2020. The orange line on the bottom shows that average residential taxable value peaked in 2008. And it took 10 years to recover back to that same level in 2018. However, when you adjust these numbers for inflation, it shows that the value actually peaked in 2006. And even in when we take this year's number and adjust it for inflation, we get an average taxable value of $130,961, which is still 15% less than that peak back in 2006. So we know that next year our Headley calculations and Prop A calculations the inflation rate multiplier will be 1.4%. That calculation is set in state statute, and the state tax commission performs the calculation and notifies assessors and equalization directors in October of each year. So we know that inflation rate multiplier for 2021 is 1.4%. So that means that the taxable value of a parcel will increase by 1.4% unless a transfer of ownership causes the taxable value to uncap. But maybe we'll talk more about that later. Next slide, please. So here's the other variable. It's our tax rates, also known as millage rates. Those two terms are used interchangeably. So this is the projection for the coming year, 2021. 2021 is the year folks actually pay this bill, but that revenue goes into the city's fiscal year that ends in 2022. So this can get a little complicated when we're talking about dates. But you notice here that the debt millage is gone and the library millage is increased to 1.1 mils. Now, this projection does not include any potential Headley rollbacks because, like I said, those Headley calculations are made after property values are finalized on December 31st of each year. Next slide, please. So here you see the results of our simple math. We divided that average residential taxable value by 1,000 because the term mills means dollars per thousand. And then we multiply that number, that product, by the millage rate to determine the tax. So here you can see our projection for the average city tax bill next year will be $1,315, or about $110 a month total. And then you can see here broken down by millage. We have the city's operating millage, the capital millage, the new library millage, and that refuse millage. Next slide, please. So the next three charts show how Troy's average residential tax bill compared to the Oakland County average in 2019, last year, the most recent year for which data is available. We'll have the 2020 data after the County Board of Commissioners approves the apportionment report in December. But in the meantime, this chart shows that Troy's average residential city tax bill was nearly 28% less than the Oakland County average in 2019. And to be clear, this is just the city portion of the tax bill. It does not include schools or other taxes. There's several different taxing authorities that you pay tax to is when you write that check, even though you write it to City of Troy, money goes to the county, the zoo authority, the art authority, transportation, a lot of different places. So here we're just talking about those city millage rates that we just reviewed. And I want to point out here too that the abbreviation PRE at the top stands for principal residence exemption. A principal resident exemption exempts residential property from up to 18 mills levied by a local school district. And to qualify for the PRE, a person must be a Michigan resident who owns and occupies the property as a residence. So generally speaking, if you own your home and you live in it, that's the place where you live, you have a principal residence exemption on your home. If you own a second home, commercial, industrial property, they pay that extra school tax. But what we're talking about here is strictly residential taxes. Next slide, please. So the last slide showed the city portion of the tax bill. This shows the school portion of the tax bill. And it shows that the school tax bill was nearly 32% greater than the Oakland County average in 2019. And again, this doesn't include that non-PRE tax levy that folks without a principal residence exemption would pay. Next slide, please. So last but not least, this slide shows Troy's average residential total tax bill was about average, was roughly equivalent to the county average back in 2019. So generally speaking, we had a city portion of the tax bill that's below average, school portion of the tax bill that is above average, and they kind of equal out to give Troy a tax bill that was the closest to the county average of any other city in the county. These charts that we're showing on the screen tonight are only include a few data points. We have the charts with all the cities in Oakland County that we'll make available on the website, so you can see all the other cities and what we're comparing to. Next slide, please. So switching gears now from taxes to expenditures, this shows that Troy's expenditures per capita were 22% less than the Oakland County average in 2019. So back on slide 13, that showed us that the city of Troy's average residential bill was 28% less than the average. And this slide shows us spending per person was about 22% less than the average. So together, these two slides show the link between the revenues that we collect and then the money that we have to provide services. Any questions before we move on to the next section?
Questions for Assistant City Manager Bruner about the property tax section from anybody? I actually just have a quick one, Bob, if you can. I just wanted to, or actually it's a comment in the form of a question. You mentioned that there's additional data on the charts that'll post up there. I think it was on page 13, it had the average at the very top, and then it showed Troy down as far as what our, the city portion of the taxes was. But just as point of reference for people who are watching, above that average, I didn't see on the chart as below average were the cities around us, except for Clawson. But Birmingham was on there, Bloomfield Hills, and I think even Rochester Hills all have a higher city tax than we do in Troy, which gives us the ability to say that we have the lowest city tax in the area, certainly in the region. But I think that's important because you look at the infrastructure we have and maintain with the roads that are better and the infrastructure that's frankly better. We do it with, frankly, with less money. So I think I just want to point that out for the residents. Councilman Hamilton, hold on one quick second. I'll get to you. But the other thing I wanted to ask was related to, we talk about averages a lot. Do we have any data, and you don't have to have it now, but as far as what the median taxes are in our city or even the mode, I'm curious more if there's a difference between what that is, because obviously averages can be skewed with outliers. And we certainly have a lot of newer development that has higher tax rates than a lot of the older. I'm just curious if that data exists somewhere, and if it does in the future memo or something, could we see some of those numbers as well?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the difference between the mean and the median. I'll look into it. I don't know how easily we can calculate that. The way that this research is pulled together, it's pulled from the values are pulled out of the county equalization report, and the tax rates are from the county apportionment report. And so at least theoretically, anybody could, duplicate these numbers and come up with the same numbers I have here today. To do a median is a different task that would require different data sources. So we'll look into that.
Okay, I appreciate it. I was just curious if it's not that easily available. I certainly don't want things to go too crazy, but I think sometimes that's illustrative in a whole different way as well. Thank you. Those are my questions for now. Rob, I see you, but is it directly related to that question that I just asked? Because otherwise I have Councilman Hamilton.
Right. Yes. I was just conversing with Nino, and he had mentioned that the mean and median are within 5%, but we can get that data for you.
Oh, great. Thank you. And thank you, Nino, for watching as well. Councilman Hamilton, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was going to say, I remember the median and mean being pretty similar, actually, so that's good. But yeah, a median means half the values are less, half the values are above, for those non-math nerds out there. My one question, or one other comment was, I thank you for kind of breaking down what all these numbers mean, because you hear $7.1 million capital budget. To a lot of people, they don't know what that means, like on a household level, because why would we're the nerds that are supposed to figure this out. And I like how you broke that down. 7.1 million kind of means about, $170 a year, which is what, $14 a month is what we're talking per household, per the median household. So I like that you break that down and keep breaking that down so people kind of understand the impact on a household to household level. But my question was, you had that chart that talked about taxable value and the history of taxable value, and how in 2006, of course, at the peak of the housing bubble, was a lot higher than even what it is now. I'd like to see that compared to assessed value, because assessed value, of course, is what we assess the value of your house is, but that differs from taxable value because of how property taxes are structured in our state. Basically, when you purchase or transfer a house, your assessed value and taxable value meet, but then as the years go by and your assessed value and the value of your house may raise higher than inflation, your taxable value can only raise at the rate of inflation. And so it's really hard when you have a huge housing recession like we had 2008 for the two to catch up. So I'd like to see that assessed value graph. I've made some charts and stuff on this on my own, and I've shared it with the mayor and others. It'd be nice to see that comparison too, to really, help residents understand how assessed values have gone up a lot faster than taxable, and we haven't been able to recover that, even inflation adjusted. And that's kind of the reason why so many municipalities are struggling. We talk about funding for the police is like a huge topic right now, and it's municipal funding. Most of it, almost half of our revenue goes, of our general fund revenue goes towards funding the police. So when we're doing this, we are straining the budget on our police departments and our fire departments. And so this is something I hope people can understand, and why state revenue sharing and other things like that are so important, because we are getting strained even in, economically successful cities like Troy. And so my comment, I guess, and question is just to, compare that assessed value and so that we can kind of clarify the difference there, because I think it's really important to make that distinction.
Thank you, Councilman Hamilton. That's a good points, questions, and comments. And I have seen the spreadsheets you've done, and I hope that if you guys present anything to us, Stephanie can make them look a little prettier than what David provided. But I'm sure she can and will. But any other questions at this point regarding the slides and Bob's presentation? Councilmember Hoderick?
Just looking back at that trends and what we went through in the dip that we saw during the Great Recession, as I'm remembering it, we, meaning people ahead of me, made some very solid, sound, conservative decisions, recognizing they knew that the comeback would take a long time, would take the 10 years that we see in that trend line. The cuts to staff were about roughly a third. Am I correct when I say that? When people ask me, did we step up? Did we make cuts in the city? My answer is always yes, but I want to make sure I'm using the roughly, if it is about a third that we did across the board.
City Manager Miller, I saw you indicate you'd like to answer.
Well, it's really tough to say across the board, because the engineering department, planning department, and building department all had to cut their budgets 40%. And the police department was not required to do that. So I'll have to check to see if it's 1/3 of the staff in total numbers that were cut. I'm not sure. In fact, Bob and I were just talking that we want to present to council how many employees we did have. And we scrambled a bit today and we weren't able to get that number, but we're going to present it on November 30th.
Very good. Thank you. Ellen, go ahead.
It might be that what I'm remembering was the police department was something like that, something around a third. I remember the cuts were pretty significant. And, the point being is that my hat tip to staff throughout this process for delivering the service level that we still have enjoyed throughout this process. sometimes I wonder how it happens. And, you know, there's a lot of people who have been working very hard and very creatively across the board. And just, I've watched that for a long time. And that's missing in the, you know, when you're doing graphs and charts, kind of that the impact on the city has been tremendous. And I just want to take a second to say, you know, thank you to those who have hung in there, and even those who preceded and have retired since. There was a lot of really great work to keep trying to deliver the high level of service as a full service city. It's not easy to do. And the state shared revenue, not always knowing that that's going to be there or come back. That the conservative management practices, recognizing that, really leave us as a council in a good place. So just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Any additional questions at this point? I'm going to hand it back to Bob. All right, Bob, go ahead.
I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Hot potato.
It's actually to me on threats. Next slide, please. And next slide. All right, so the threats that we have are the that we wanted to talk about today. These aren't all of them, but these are items that we wanted to mention. You can see library, the aquatic center, Sanctuary Lake, the Headley Amendment and Proposal A, COVID-19 as a pandemic, and also legacy costs. Next slide, please. And next. So the great news is we can take the library off as a threat. So thank you again to everyone who worked really hard on this millage. Millage did pass, obviously. And so this takes pressure off of the general fund to keep this library open. And we're very proud of that fact. And here's some items on there that, you know, we should have about 5.6 million in revenue, and the hours, we should be a 7-day library, et cetera, as you can see. So we're really excited about that. Next slide. Next. So you can see the, this was the TFAC, and you've seen this slide before. The idea is when you see down below the unrestricted net assets in the red, that's the cause is that the advances have to come from the general fund to make it a solvent fund. So as of now, there's approximately 200,000 that's owed from the aquatic center to the general fund. Wanted to point out, I did talk to our auditor about, you know, this being an enterprise fund and what it would take to move that eventually. And there's not a lot of guidance out there, he said, on that. And it's that we can contribute from the general fund. We can continue to, but at some point we need to take a look at it, because to be a enterprise fund, it can't solely rely on general fund contributions. Next slide. So as you saw in the previous slide, there was many years where we've been status quo on how much was owed from the general fund. And that's because we've got a list of $755,000 of capital that's going to be coming due in the next 4 years to maintain this family aquatic center. So this is just to point out that the capital will be, there'll be a lot of capital coming down as a request to this council in the next several years. Next slide. Sanctuary Lake, we haven't talked a lot about in the last budget that I was here at, other than that they do make money operationally, but let's look at this a little bit further. Next slide. Very similar to the aquatic center on the left, or I'm sorry, on the bottom in the red is the unrestricted net assets. And the cause of running a deficit each year is the blue line, which is the advances from other funds, which is 2 funds actually. It's the other golf course. Sanctuary Lake also has to borrow from Sylvan Glen, and then also the general fund. So what's happening is this has debt. Sanctuary Lake has debt through the year 2028. So they actually do make money operationally, but not if you include the debt in that. And so this is causing a major deficit. So now why is this important? When the general fund, and we just went through a bond offering, we got our bond rating. One of the things that Standard & Poor's looks at is our fund balance. And what about our fund balance? When it gets eaten up by these advances, really, you're looking at this and you're saying, will Sanctuary Lake or will the Aquatic Center ever be able to repay this? We have to, from a geeky accounting perspective, we have to take those dollars, these intercompany loans, and put them as restricted. So what it does is it lowers our unassigned fund balance to restricted. And so basically, it's off limits for council to touch because we've already spent this money to help Sanctuary Lake and the Aquatic Center. Next slide. So why is this happening? If you look at the Aquatic Center Fund, you can see their other Oakland County water parks are supported by property taxes, and it's just Troy's Aquatic Center is not. And then, we have to look, will increasing fees cover all the costs? And that's something that I know that our recreation folks have looked at for years, and in talking to them, they're very comfortable with the fees that they charge currently, and they're afraid that they'll deter more revenue if they increase the fees too much. Moving on to Sanctuary Lake Golf Course. Again, annual operating income is much less than covering the annual debt payment. And again, as of this year, our general fund advances are 6.1 million. Sylvan Glen is 2.8. And by the end of the bond in 2028, right now we're estimating approximately $13.5 million will be required to be advanced to pay off all of that debt. So really, what does that mean? Sylvan Glen doesn't have any more money to borrow. So all that additional $7.5 million is going to come from the general fund. Next slide. I'm going to pass this over to Bob now to talk about Headley Amendment and Proposal A.
Thanks, Rob. So in this section, I'm going to attempt to describe how much the Headley Amendment and Proposal A have limited the city's tax revenue. Next slide. So first, I just want to really briefly explain what we're talking about when we say Headley and Proposal A. So first, Michigan voters approved an amendment to the Michigan Constitution known as the Headley Amendment in 1978. The amendment's named after its author, Richard Headley, and it limits property tax revenue by rolling back tax rates. And that rolling back of tax rates is known as the Headley rollback. So these are terms sometimes that get tossed around, folks might hear. Second, Michigan voters approved Proposal A in 1994. It was literally Proposal A on the ballot in 1994. And Proposal A did a lot of things, but for the purpose of our conversation tonight, I'm going to talk about the fact that it established taxable value as a new way to measure the value of property for taxing purposes and limited the growth of taxable value each year. So we could talk about how these measures limit property revenue, tax revenue all night. So instead of doing that, I'm going to try to show you how much they've limited revenue and reduced the city's ability to provide services. Next slide, please. So here we are with total taxable value from 1999 to 2020. Earlier, we were looking at average value of a residential parcel. Now we're looking at the whole city, whole taxable value. Blue line shows that it peaked in 2008 and has not yet fully recovered. The orange line above is taxable value adjusted in inflation. It again shows that after you adjust for inflation, the peak was actually a little earlier, 2003. Fast forward to 2020, and the taxable value of 5.34 million is 25% less than that peak of 7.17. Next slide, please. Now, this chart shows the city's operating and capital millage have been nearly flat between 1999 and 2020, same period that we just saw for taxable value. Next slide. So this is the product of that simple math. Taxable value divided by 1,000 multiplied by the tax rate shows that the city's operating and capital tax revenues, so those two millages specifically, between 1999 and 2020. Again, the blue line shows the peak in 2008, still hasn't fully recovered in 2020. And the orange line above shows that tax revenue peaked in 2003 after adjusting for inflation. And in 2020, tax revenue is actually 27% less than peak. So in other words, the city's ability to provide services today is about 75% of what it was before the Great Recession. Now, to make matters worse, Headley and Proposal A make much of that loss permanent, because taxable value can fall as fast as the real estate market falls, but it can only grow by the rate of inflation, or 5% annually, whichever is less, and it's never been 5%, including that 1.4% multiplier for the coming year that I mentioned. The 26-year average is 2.2 annually. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Thank you, Bob. Mark, you're up.
Thank you. Can you forward the slideshow? Next slide, please.
Actually, Mark, is it an appropriate time to ask any questions we have specific to the threats, or is this COVID-19 part of the threat section of the presentation?
It's a threat, but it's a good time for questions.
Okay. Anyone on council have questions relating to the doom and gloom we just heard from this Councilmember Hamilton?
Sanctuary Lake is something that comes up, I think, a lot of budget cycles and as new council members shuffle in and out. I remember when I first joined and I saw the deficit that it had, and I asked some questions, and the impression I got was that back, I don't know, what was it, 2003, 2004, when the bonds and the funding for Sanctuary Lake and came in, and when the golf course was built, that the annual expenses to maintain the dump that it previously used to be were quite a bit, and that building Sanctuary Lake kind of reduced those. Can you talk about that? And I know, I think you were here back then, Mark. I don't remember, but can you talk about that? Like, how did that, maybe the deficit here doesn't tell the whole story, because we would have had to continue to maintain a dump all these years if it hadn't been developed, and what those costs would have been.
Yes, thank you. The way you stated it isn't exactly correct, and I'm going to preface this that it wasn't really in my realm day to day, the development of the golf course. So what you had were actually more than one landfill, a few of them, and they were old landfills. And the problem with old landfills is they weren't built with current technology. So I don't know so much as if there were annual expenses, but there was the need to reduce liability to properly cap and vent and have that all approved by DEQ, which I think it was DEQ at the time. So that explains the previous decision by council to have a dump, and of course, nobody capped it and sealed it the way they do today. And then to buy another dump because it was next door and do it all together. That then a council then decided in the 2000s, when golf course was much more expensive. The pro formas said that you could charge a lot more for golf. They're probably charging half as much now since the Great Recession. So it was more about appropriately capping the old landfill. And the only thing you can pretty much put on a landfill is a golf course or open space. And I will communicate this to staff and see if they have any other input, if any other insight.
Yeah, and I guess my thought is that we're going to have to pay that debt back no matter what. So if the operating budget for Sanctuary Lake is positive, I don't really see what else we can do, really. Or the debt's not going to go away if we don't pay it. So I don't think, closing Sanctuary Lake would do us any good. It's not going to make that debt go away. So if we're non-debt related cash flow positive, it seems like at the very least we have to keep running it. The question is, how do we pay that debt back? And it's a good question.
Mayor?
Was there any opportunity, Mark, did you want to answer that? Or is that?
I wanted to just talk a little bit that part of the issue is the type of fund it is. It was supposed to be self-sustaining, and it's not. So it's a little bit disingenuous. And then you're outside of my realm of expertise, and Rob would have to comment.
I mean, as a follow-up to that, is that not debt that can be reissued or refinanced at these lower rates, or is there anything that can be done?
It's already really low rate. It's like 2% or lower. So I remember looking at this before back in the springtime to look at all our debt, and it was already pretty low.
Rob, go ahead.
Right. So you have to have over a 5% cost savings when you do a refinancing. And as Councilmember Hamilton said, the rates are so low right now already on this debt that we couldn't achieve that. That's why we haven't come to you with a refinancing of this debt. One of the things you could do, though, not suggesting it because we don't know the market, no one's even gone this way, but one way to get your money back is to sell an asset. I don't, such as a golf course. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that, Councilmember Hamilton had mentioned, we are stuck. But one of the things that we can do is once this debt is paid off, is we can start using those favorable operating income to start paying the general fund back. But that wouldn't be till 2028 is what I wanted to make sure everyone was clear on.
No, that was so the follow-up, it was 2028 when the debt's paid off. That's right. So 8 years
That's
from
correct.
now, essentially. And did I hear you right that Sylvan Glen is running out of money to help supplement, or did I misunderstand when you said that? Because I know their operating money just goes over to Sanctuary Lake to pay. I mean, essentially it gets transferred over, probably not from a technical standpoint, but that's the
right
fact.
So this was when I look back at the records, and what I could assume was that before we started to use the general fund, we used Sanctuary Lake. Sylvan Glen first as a source of cash. So once Sanctuary Lake, because they've already lent out $2.8 million, their cash is now basically break even. So that's why there's nothing left there. So we used the golf course to supplement the golf course first, then we went to the general fund.
I see. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I think Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga, you'd raised your hand a couple rounds ago on this section. Does that still hold true?
Yes, so with Sanctuary Lake, I was just going to comment that this summer I did have a very extensive question from a resident asking just that, why don't we just sell Sanctuary Lake? But what I'm understanding is that would not be possible really until after 2028, if I understand correctly.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say, you could sell it now. It would just be that if there, we say we owe $8 million on it still. I don't even know if there's a market where we would get that $8 million. I mean, this is all speculation. I hate to speculate like that, but I don't think just because we have some debt outstanding, there's no reason why we couldn't look at that opportunity. But I might even defer to Ms. Bloom if she knows of any legal restrictions.
Thank you, Rob. City Attorney Bloom?
Yeah, this is something that I'm happy to look at. I was here when all of this did take place. And, I think, again, it's whether or not it's a financially viable opportunity, I think that's something too that is unknown at this point in time. But I am happy to look and see if there are some restrictions with the bonds that were issued.
Thank you, City Attorney Bloom. I guess I feel the need to state for the record, I hate the thought of selling hundreds of acres of city-owned essential parkland, even if it's limited as a golf course, to somebody else. So I don't want to think too much about that at this point, recognizing that that would be, I think, a loss, even assuming we can work out the financials. But Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I was just wondering, I mean, given the fact that it is a landfill, does that make it less desirable in terms of somebody wanting to buy it? Or does it bring down the property value in any way, given the fact that it is limited, in terms of what you can use, the use?
City Manager Miller?
Yeah, I don't know anything specific about the value, but it does have some negative attributes to it. The property has high salt content in it, and when there are semi-drought conditions, the water from the pond turns the coarse yellow, and that's kind of a downside. But we don't really know a lot about the subject of selling this because we really haven't broached it. We've talked a little bit to Indigo, formerly known as Billy Casper, if they have any professional insight, whether there is a market for something like this. But that's about all my knowledge is regarding being able to sell it.
Just from a total layman's perspective, I can't imagine anyone wanting to buy a golf course that they'd have to keep as a golf course that's running a deficit like this. That's not a good business deal. It would be certainly a different equation if there was development opportunities. And I mean, I think that's what people generally look for. But anyway, that's just my layman's opinion at this point. Councilmember Hamilton?
I would just say that anyone buying it would just look at the cash flow. They wouldn't really look at the debt. I doubt they would buy it with the debt. So, from a pure cash flow perspective, ignoring the debt, it is positive. But I just don't think that helps us. I mean, maybe that gives us a few million, but regardless, we're still going to have to pay off the debt. That's unavoidable. And so I think it doesn't really matter. I'm reluctant to sell it because I think it's a good asset for the city. Plus, I just don't think it solves the problem anyway. Whatever we got for it won't be enough. And so it's unfortunate that a decision that was made 17 years ago, we have to deal with. But at the same time, there's been a lot of decisions the last 17 years that have been very good, such as our legacy costs, such as our fund balance, and so and our our roads. There have been a lot of investment there. So it's like there's good and bad here, and I don't think it's as bad as it sounds because we have so many other good things that have happened. This is one thing we have to deal with, but I don't see how selling the course would help us really. So I'm reluctant to do that, but we'll find a way. But we have to look into it.
Councilmember Erickson Galt, excuse me.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wanted to just thank Mr. Malzek for looking into the issue of the Troy Family Aquatic Center status as an enterprise fund. I know that was a question that was in my mind when we were dealing with the previous issues about whether it would be open in 2021 based on the necessary maintenance. Going from the comment earlier about how other water parks are supported by taxes and the aquatic center is not, and I just want to clarify, it's my understanding that because of the fact that it's structured as an enterprise fund, it is designed to be self-supporting and not supported by either general fund or by a special tax. Is that correct?
CFO Malzek is nodding his head yes, but go ahead, Rob.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Councilmember Erickson Galt. Absolutely.
Okay. And so assuming that there was some mechanism to convert it to some other type of fund where we could support it either with general fund or with a special tax such as we do for the library, then that might alleviate some of the issue with it basically running into the red. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that assessment. You know, a potential model would be, yes, like, you know, later in our presentation, we're going to talk about opportunities. And one of the models there would be similar to, like you said, it would be like a recreation millage or something like that to help support things like park development, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson Galt. Good questions. Any other questions at this point before we continue? All right, seeing none, I'll pass it back over to you, City Manager Miller.
Thank you. This is just a slide which includes a COVID summary for Oakland County. And the chart on the lower left is a 7-day average of daily cases. And it's showing something that everyone here knows, is that the cases are spiking. What we've learned about COVID is not much. It's just we take it, you know, take it as it comes and try to figure it out. Knock on wood, the CARES Act has really provided us a considerable amount of funds. And, you know, as CFO Rob Melzek said, we'll come and do one budget amendment demonstrating all those new revenues to the budget. And we're just putting this here because it's just an unknown. That's all. Next slide, please.
Okay, next slide. So legacy costs, you know, Councilmember Hamilton had mentioned, like you said, there's been a lot of doom and gloom. This is under the threat, but it's really some great news about our legacy costs, but I want to talk about why it is a threat. When you look at our 3 plans here, we have an employee retirement system, which is our pension. We have the volunteer fire incentive program, which all of you are familiar with because we made some adjustments to that plan this past year. And then we also have our retiree health care. I want to talk just real quick about Public Act 202 of 2017. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not, some of the newer council members. The state passed in 2017 a law to try to get everyone on the same page using the same actuarial items like investment rate of return. So they were trying to be able to compare apples to apples when they're comparing, let's say, Troy's employee retirement system with Farmington Hills or Rochester Hills or whatever the case may be. So we're under guidance of the employee retirement system that Public Act 202 says if we're under 60% funded, we have to put up a plan together to mitigate and how to get our percentage above 60. The good news is with our pension plan, we're above that 60%. The bad news with the VFIP is we're under 60%, but the second part of that being on the state's called naughty list is that it has to be more than 10% of your spend. And so because it's about $1.7 million a year, that's not anywhere near 10% of our general fund expenditures. So on an overall basis with the state, we're okay with that plan. And then on retiree healthcare, they have a little bit less of a guideline because retiree healthcare throughout the state is the problem where we're not having proper funding. And that is anything under 40% is we'd have to come up with a plan to get above that percentage. And we're above 80% as you'll see. So next slide. So this is the pension plan, and it's great news. If you look at the far right net liability, it's a negative, which means it's actually an asset, which means we have, as of June 30th of 2020, this is current data, we're $36 million above our funded liability is higher, our funded assets are higher than our liability. We're actually at 122% of funding. Why I bring this up as a threat is if you look at 2011 through 2014, we were in that employer contribution column, we were averaging approximately $2 million a year over those 4 years. And just because now when council year after year, you're starting to see that when we come to you, we say, we have no employer contribution, no employer contribution. That may not last forever. And so what can happen is with, a market correction or the actuarial assumptions that we're using aren't accurate and that they all are negative to us, this 122% funded could fall below 100 and we might have to start contributing again. So I just want to show you, yes, we're in great shape here, but it can become something that's unplanned for in the future. The good news is through the 21 and 22 fiscal years, we'll be at zero as well. Those actuarial reports have told us through 2021 and 2022, we're at zero. Next slide. VFIP's a little bit different. We're 44% funded. As you know, in 2019, we made some changes to the plan. That's why you'll see in the 2018 versus 2019 column, we went up over $400,000. And our net liability stands at $14 million. So there are some things that we can do. Councilmember Hamilton, City Manager Miller, and myself were on that board, and we just voted last Wednesday to close the amortization period, which means that we now are going to take our unfunded position and start working that down at a greater clip than if it was an open amortization period. So that's good news there. And one of the things that's possible for you in the budgeting process is if you have any money that you see fit to say, instead of putting maybe $1 million towards capital, you could always overfund it in a given year. Again, the actuary requires us in this next fiscal year to spend $1.7 million, but we can always put in more if council deemed fit to do so. Next slide. Retiree healthcare, our net liability there is $20 million. We're 82% funded, which is great. And just wanted to show you over the last 5 years that actually our funding level has gone down because we've actually had very good experience. Through our experience study, we actually had very good favorable things happen, such as we implemented Medicare Advantage, which lowered the overall liability. And so we've had some very positive things happen there. And so now we're up, we lowered our contribution from 5.5 million in the 20 budget to 3.2 million. So just in that one item, we saved $2.3 million from 20 to 21. And again, that could go up in the future, and that's why we have this listed as a threat. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it over to Bob to talk about the good stuff, the opportunities.
Thanks, Rob. Although the news on our OPEB was good news as well. So, as it's been mentioned, the last several years have been pretty good for the city financially. We haven't had to make contributions to the retirement systems. Economy's been good. And no one of those threats is going to put the city in a terribly precarious position. But we do want to look at some, what are some opportunities to help mitigate these threats in the future. Next slide. So these are a few ideas. These are all new revenue options that would require voter approval. So this would, take a lot of time and effort to even begin to implement any of these. And that's part of the reason why, we want to have this conversation now in the fall, well in advance of the budget process next year. Now, this list is not intended to be all-inclusive. Think about today as being the beginning of a conversation rather than the end or a time for decisions. Next slide, please. So earlier in the presentation, we looked at 3 charts showing how Troy's average residential tax bill compared to the Oakland County average back in 2019. And you may recall that Troy's total residential tax bill was about $32 less than the average at that time. Now that may not seem like much, but it equated to more than $250,000 and would have generated more than $1 million at that time. Next slide. So this chart simply shows what the average Troy residential tax bill would have been in 2019 if the city had actually levied that extra 0.2579 mils. It would have been the same as the Oakland County average. Next slide. So you recall from the previous slides, the city portion of the average Troy residential tax bill was about $489 less than the Oakland County average in 2019. Now that equated to nearly 4 mils at that time and would have generated about $19 million based on the values at that time. Next slide. Now, 4 mils may seem like a lot, and it is a lot. But when you look at this chart, it shows that the average Troy residential tax bill would have been if the city had levied those extra millages or that extra mill at that time. And it would have pushed the average Troy residential tax bill about 10% above the Oakland County average. But Troy would have only surpassed Northville in terms of the ranking and would have still been less than Novi. So none of this is meant to be suggestive of anything specific, but just kind of instructive of how Troy stacks up to other communities in Oakland County, and what the potential room is for additional revenue options in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mark now.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Can you move the slide forward? Okay. So what we have here is just a demonstration of expiring debt millages. Proposal A was for public safety, and we built the police station and the police and fire training center with those dollars. Proposal B was for roads, and Proposal C built the community center and also provided funding for most of those 11 undeveloped parks that were purchased, most of them, but not all of them. So what we have options for are new millage options, such as for public safety, whether it's facility repairs, updates, streets, or parks and recreation facilities. Next slide. We currently have 1.1 mils for 10 years dedicated for the library, and that's used for both capital and operating. And you could use a dedicated millage for both, for capital and operating for parks and recreation, which is common, police, fire, streets, trails, and pathways. This is not, once again, suggesting that we do any one of those at this time. It's just examples what possibly can be done, because all of them may or may not be even a good idea for the city of Troy. Next slide, please. Bob, can you, if there's any questions, but Bob, you can take over from here.
Are there any questions at this point from council? Seeing none. Go ahead, Bob.
All right, last but certainly not least, we want to talk about community engagement before we wrap up. Next slide, please. So all the revenue options that we just talked about would require voter approval. Now, as the city council knows, 64% of Troy voters approved the new library millage earlier this month, and that didn't happen by accident. I think we all agree that it was the result of high quality community engagement. And based on what I've seen and heard from council, I believe you want more of that high quality community engagement. And we want to deliver it. So let's talk about, basically we have this formula of using surveys, focus groups, and town hall meetings that's worked. So if we were to move forward with any one of these kind of revenue proposals in the future, we'd certainly do something similar. Next slide. So in the meantime, I want to give you a sneak preview of what I hope to bring forward at the next regular meeting relating to the community survey. This is a slide from Walla Walla, Washington, that we're going to use as an example. And this chart explains how to interpret the kind of community survey results we plan to deliver with this community survey. This survey is going to be quite a bit different than the library specific survey that we did earlier this year. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just a teaser, a taste of things to come. And again, this is an example from another city. But basically, the way you interpret it here in this survey, it suggests that decreasing investments in the services in the upper left quadrant and increasing investments in the services in the lower right quadrant would help increase satisfaction in the areas with the greatest impact on overall resident satisfaction. Now, the way the survey is structured is that these strategic priorities are based on overall resident satisfaction. And so they include things that are outside of the city's control. The city alone is not responsible for transportation in the city of Troy. As we've discussed, MDOT's playing a really big role in updating the I-75 transportation in Troy right now. And certainly the city government is not responsible for providing shopping opportunities, but these are things that affect the quality of life in the community. And so these are things that will be measured, and to the extent that we can, the city can then focus on the priorities that it has control over. Next slide, please. All right, so this chart, it's the same format where you focus on the bottom right quadrant and trying to push those services up into the top right quadrant. And so in this example, it shows information for 25 programs and services selected by the city of Walla Walla, Washington, to help develop their budget priorities. And so, like I said, hopefully we'll be coming to you at the next regular meeting with some more information about the survey that we plan to conduct in Troy, and get your direction and feedback on that so that we can launch that project probably after the first of the year. So with that, next slide, please. I think we are at the end and ready to try to answer any other questions you may have or facilitate further discussion.
Thank you, Bob. And Mark, go ahead, Mark, you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to wrap up our presentation and turn this totally over to council. As Bob said, this is your opportunity to ask questions, give us direction. Our next meeting on November 30th is to do a couple things. One, any things that come up where you want clarification, we can research it and present it to you. But we also are going to present the capital plan, some things related to police body cameras. We're going to talk a little bit about HR and positions and succession planning a little bit. And in that also with positions is, as an example, is community engagement, maybe a little more expertise in that arena. With that now, Mayor, we'll turn it over to you and council, and please deliberate. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, city management, Mark, Bob, and Rob. Great slides, great presentation. I think we're off to a good start, and I love that we're doing this again in November, early November to start, or mid-November, I guess we are now. You all just got so much bigger on my screen. That's good. That helps. What I'm going to do right now, actually, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break just to reset for a second. We just sat through a good amount of slides and sitting here. Let's take 5 minutes. When I come back, I'm going to pretend as if we are around our boardroom table as usual, and I'd like to go around the table and give each of you an opportunity to ask any questions, make some statements. I imagine some facilitated conversation may come from that, but let's try to keep it as focused as we can, recognizing there are 7 of us. We just saw 48 slides of $180 million, and this is just the first of many opportunities to discuss the budget priorities as we move forward in planning for fiscal year 21-22. So let's take 5 minutes. We'll see you all back then, and then depending on where you are on my screens, I'll see who gets to go first, and then I'll work around the screen. All right, so we'll be back. record, our Troy City Council special meeting this evening. At this opportunity, we've had our presentation and we will, from city management, and we'll now go ahead and go to a general discussion by council. As I stated before the break, pretend that we're sitting around our boardroom table, and I will go around the table or the screen and call on each of you to go ahead and say your piece now, ask any additional questions, start any conversations that feel necessary, but recognizing that, like I said, this is one of many meetings and opportunities to have your voice heard. So let's be mindful of that, if that makes sense. I think you can understand what I'm saying with that. So first on my screen, the council member is Councilmember Erickson Galt. So I'm going to start with you.
All right, no pressure. Okay, first question, which should be easy enough, is was that the presentation we just watched, is that on the city's website? And if not, can it be put there?
We made changes to it earlier today, so it's not posted yet, but it will be.
Okay,
along with the exhibits that I referenced, that because the presentation has small charts with not all the data points on it.
Okay, all right, fabulous. First, I just have to thank everybody for all of the hard work in putting this together and doing it so early. I really applaud City Manager Miller and Assistant City Manager Bruner, CFO Malzek, and everybody else who was involved in trying to put this together and get this, be so proactive about this. I recall last year, and let me preface this by saying that numbers are not my strong suit in any sense. But I often say if I was good at numbers, I wouldn't have gone into law. I would have been an engineer or finance or something that's hopefully a lot easier career. But anyways, this is so important getting this out here, talking about historically what's happened. I think that a lot of people forget when they're thinking about their tax bill. Nobody likes paying their tax bill. I don't enjoy writing that check. But a lot of people don't think about where we've been in reference to where we are, where we're going. I think that's so important, especially some of the issues we've talked about today. The bond debt that dates back 15, 20, 25 years. I know that I've been living in Troy for 17 years now, and the community center was there when I moved here. I mean, those debt millages, those go back a long way. So a lot of what we're dealing with today are decisions that were made before anybody who's on council right now was on. I mean, none of us were on council when those decisions were made. Some of which, as Councilmember Hamilton pointed out, some of which are good decisions, some of which are, maybe in hindsight, perhaps there might have been a different opportunity to take it a different direction. I'm very, very concerned about the aquatic center. I don't know why it was set up as an enterprise fund. I know that was quite a long time ago. And again, with some people who are not the current council, including some wonderful, wise people who set it up that way, it doesn't seem like it's the way to go. And I want to continue to explore ways that we can restructure that so that, like the library or like our recreation programs, that we're not that we don't have a fund that does nothing but continually borrow money just to provide the basic services that people and our citizens obviously love the aquatic center. I think that was made really clear a couple months ago when we were dealing with this. They love it. They want it to stay. But the current funding model is absolutely unsustainable. And so we need to figure out a way that we can make sure that the aquatic center is fully funded, that it's competitive with other water parks in the area. It really disturbs me to know that the way that it's set up financially makes it hard for us to compete with, the county run water parks and so forth. And then in the long term, I want us, and I know we've talked about this, and this is not for 2021, 2022, this is maybe 2025, is to think about where do we go from here? The aquatic center has got to the point where it's nearing the end of its useful life in many respects, which is why we're continually putting money into it to maintain it. I want us to be thinking broadly and far into the future in terms of, not just what we need to do for the next year or 2 years, but where do we want to go with some of these things? And I would wrap in with that issues about, and I know that I'm looking forward to the discussion about capital funding, because I know over the past year that City Manager Miller has spearheaded a lot of work on assessing our current state of our current buildings here in Troy, which are also, like the Aquatic Center, are getting old. And we need to make some critical decisions over the next couple of years about how to either maintain, remodel, rebuild our capital assets here in Troy. So again, I really appreciate very much what this information. It's very helpful to somebody who avoids numbers. It's good to have this spelled out in a way that I can not only understand, but I can communicate to Troy residents when they ask questions such as, why doesn't all the new development in Troy pay for all of, the extra needs, such as the needs for the library and so forth. It's, although explaining Headley, I'm not even sure I understand Headley. Explaining it to people is not that. So again, I want us to be thinking years down the road and not just constantly trying to maintain what we have now, but let's think about what we want to do with the aquatic center. What, where do we want to take it? Do we want to continue to maintain it as it is, or do we want to, reform it, create a new water attraction that would hopefully is equally loved and appreciated, and not quite such a money pit. So, okay, so that's my take. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing more about our capital needs.
Gosh, thank you, Councilmember Erickson Galt. I love there's the this year we have to focus on, or next year, and then there's the long range. And I think it will benefit all of us in the city as a whole if we really do look at that. And I think that's great, great perspective for us to deal with and to think about as we move forward. Next on my screen, if I move down, it's Councilmember Hoderick. Come on down, you're the next contestant. I really wish I had Price is Right music playing in the background, but
I dare you to hum it. Yeah, the aquatic center, that has been for some time now a discussion point. The aquatic center, the library building, was what, at one point we were looking at creating some sort of private public funding opportunity with the civic center property to get at how we improve those assets, leveraging the property we had on Big Beaver. Just, it's almost like I feel like we lost those years and we are starting over on those discussions in terms of what's the strategy we can take. So this council is it occurs to me as I'm sitting here, we're in an interesting position with a new CFO, new city manager, new assistant city manager. and virtually an all new council starting fresh on that discussion. And that's not a bad thing. We can give it fresh eyes and fresh perspective. I think the fundamentals remain a priority for me. Public safety, the 40% on the VFIP, if we can inch that up, that I think just always looking at this from the perspective of what we are absolutely required to provide and stand for first and foremost. But then there's this quality of life piece that has just really been forced to limp along since the Great Recession. And when you think about the fact that we're still only at 75% where we were back then, with a millage cap that this council can't, I think I want to assure anybody watching who's worried about their taxes increasing, we can't. It always has to come for a vote to the people for anything that we would want to do. So I guess I wanted, that was a piece, a legacy that we have too from back, 2007 that was passed, the millage cap that changed to the charter. The charter precludes us from taking steps, anything that we'd want to do to try to increase funding for quality of life. We won't be able to just come at you, fellow residents, to increase our tax bills. And I don't think anybody sitting on the council enjoys having their property taxes raised. But we also want to protect our assets in this city. So that's the rock and the hard place that we're between. And I sense, city administration is looking at all our faces here on the screen, on this virtual table saying, what's the priority? Of course, we heard from folks that they love the aquatic center. And I go back so far, I can remember when essentially that was mostly residents that used it. And the only way you could come into the aquatic center is if you were with someone who lived in Troy. And now we're looking at trying to make it competitive and be able to fund itself. It was just its intent back all those many years ago was just a very different place than where we are now. And I do worry about it being a money pit. I want to retain it, but I'm not sure what the best answer is on that. In a 5-year view, for example, I know we're not looking to close it down. We've gotten that feedback very quickly, but is that a long haul decision? I'm sitting here not sure. And when I look at the Civic Center property overall and, opportunities for beautifying it, our parks for beautifying, we're hearing our residents practically beg us to make sure that we're protecting our green space. And so that green space, maybe that's the next priority that we're hearing. And it's interesting, we'll be looking at our master plan as well, a long-term view of our master plan that, in the coming year, that this will lend itself to working with residents to best understand. But I do know, things on the public safety front, people still talk about animal control and missing that here in the city. I mean, that's a piece of feedback I get all the time, that the day-to-day service that is not available. Am I saying I think that's a priority in our budget right now? I don't know. Body cams for the police department, that's a huge expenditure. That's a huge priority in this day and age. We can't have everything. So we are looking at these quality of life assets and how we continue to protect them. And I guess that's a priority. Our green space is a priority, and our parks have not had the investment that they need to have. And I guess and our library building has not had the investment it needed to have because we had so many delays, and the same with the aquatic center. So looking at how we can do that in our budget, that's what's on my mind. And I don't know if we can get there from here, but those are the things that are on my mind right now.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. I'm sure we're going to hear similar sentiments from others tonight. That's the definite theme, for sure. Councilmember Hamilton, you're moving over, or you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. I've said a lot of what's been on my mind already, but I'll try to I have a lot of notes here. One thing I'd like to see in the meeting in 2 weeks is what is our trajectory as a city if we maintain our current level of funding? What is the trajectory if we got more funding, different levels? What is, the ultimate, what would be the optimal situation? I'd like to really show residents what different revenue streams for our city looks like and what that brings to them, and with very specific, tangible things that will benefit them to show from it. Ultimately, whatever property tax revenue we get here is up to the voters. Councilmember Hoderick said it well. We are capped at the millage rate. I mean, really, in essence, every municipality in a way is, but we're capped a little more than others due to our millage cap in the charter. But really, what that means is it's up to residents what they're willing to invest in their community. And we can, and that's why I'm glad we're doing this community engagement to show residents what their community looks like now, what further investment could mean. One thing I'd like to talk about is the Downtown Development Authority. It's refinancing of bonds. I know all of us here know it, but for residents that don't, we refinance bonds that were in our Downtown Development Authority. And as a result, for the next 13 years, we have $461,000 per year that we're going to need to allocate. And so maybe we can leverage that to help with some of our goals. And I'm also with Councilmember Hoderick on further funding for the volunteer firefighter incentive plan. I mean, we save so much money as a city by what our volunteers gave us. And so if, to me, that is a priority to me to fund that. It was a priority last year. I'm on the board, so, it means a little more to me because of that, but that's always up there for me. I have to say, I'm a little reluctant to talk about, new millages and stuff in the near future with COVID raging and getting worse. And, I'm hoping, I'm optimistic that maybe a federal government could provide more funding for COVID, could provide infrastructure funding. I know we've all been waiting that for a long time, but maybe that could help us out in the near future. But I do want to begin the dialogue with residents about what different investments look like. You get a lot, the average, as we said earlier, the average residential household in Troy pays about $110 a month in property taxes to the city of Troy. It's a lot more than that, but that goes mostly to education and other forms. For that $110 a month, you get police protection, fire protection, ambulance, roads, snow plows, parks and rec. And then even you get a little bit from how we've had to subsidize the aquatic center and other things. You get all the buildings in the city, and you get all the basic government funding functions like elections and accounting and city manager's office. So that's a lot for $110. But one thing we've had to build is we've gone through a lot of difficult times in this city is communication with our residents. So they understand what's going on, and we got to see where they want to go. Do they want to invest more? Do they want us to maintain the same rate? We'll follow, it's the residents' decision. We'll follow their lead there. And so community engagement to me is the key. I think that sums up everything. And then another good thing Councilmember Hoderick said was everything's a balance. Like if you want to prioritize funding one thing, you're going to have to take it from something else. And that's why it's like, half our budget is public safety. Half our general fund budget is public safety, police, fire. So when people say they want to make cuts to state and local funding, that's always the first thing that goes. And to me, I want to fund our police. I want to fund our fire. I want to fund our ambulance. That's the number one priority. And so anytime someone calls us up and says, why can't you do this thing for us? It'll cost $500,000 a year. It's like, where do you think that's going to come from? It's going to come from that. So good things to keep in mind, but that's kind of where my head's at right now. And I'll let other council members give their piece too.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. between election information and financial dollar charts, I mean, these are your two favorite months, I think, probably that you've had it for meetings in a long time. So this is very exciting for you. And I personally, I just want to say I do appreciate how your excitement for all of this stuff and the charts you have sent me in the past and the information. I know that you did ask some good targeted questions earlier, especially that I think are helpful for us and for residents as well. So thank you for that. I'm snaking around. Councilmember Chamberlain Crangun.
Thank you, Mayor. My audio, to warn you, is going in and out a little bit, so let me know if you can't hear me. Just raise your hand. I'll dive in. So to start, I think the evidence, and this is what I saw this PowerPoint to be, this presentation, it was evidence about the state of our general fund, our capital fund, as well as funds like the enterprise funds of the TFAC, of the Troy Family Aquatic Center, and how they're tight, they're challenged. And given that our main source of revenue, property taxes, are stagnant, with Headley, Prop A, those are not likely to change anytime soon. And so therefore we have to think, how can we maintain the level of services that people know and love and expect in Troy, let alone think about adding new things. And I know we're talking about body cams, which I'm very supportive for our police department. And we recognize these are expensive expenditures. And also, of course, TFAC is a priority for me of thinking how to address this. And so knowing that these are funds that are already tight and constrained, it is clear that we need to start thinking about different options. But at the same time, this summer, as I spoke with a lot of residents, I heard from people concerned, and this came from a number of seniors and across the board, about their taxes. And we did see that our taxes are about average in terms of Oakland County. And the evidence we saw tonight was very helpful, because I did hear from those some of those same people that it was, for often cases, it's the Troy School District. It's some of those taxes for seniors who are not using the schools that they found to be quite high. So I am sensitive to wanting to really hear what our residents have to say about this, given that I did hear concern that seniors feel they will have to at some point move on from Troy, and they question whether they can afford Troy. And then the other point with that, as Councilmember Hamilton said, is with COVID. And I had a conversation with a neighbor of mine a month or so ago, just asking about and assuming that we have access to data to help us understand the economic situation of our residents. And I realized we have different pieces of data here and there, but in terms of knowing really unemployment rates and all of that at a very local level, we don't necessarily have all of that. But I think the question that my neighbor was posing is, it was assumption that when we make decisions, he's trusting we bear in mind that we are cognizant of the economic financial situations of our residents, and that we're each in very different financial situations, especially during this time of COVID, of the pandemic, and record numbers of layoffs and such. So do want to be very sensitive to those dynamics and want to really have a better sense of how our community is doing during this time. If we want to think about other options around dedicated millages or a debt millage. Having said that, though, the other thing that comes to mind is, I think, quality of life. We are seeing during COVID that quality of life is a priority for so many people. And there have been studies from the Trust for Public Land. I've read Urban Institute has put out a number of studies on the value of parks and recreation during COVID-19. We saw that the Oakland County's parks and recreation millage passed overwhelmingly. It actually fared quite better than our library millage. And I think it was 80-something% of the population passed that. And I believe it was in Birmingham, our neighbor had a Parks and Rec bond, and that passed overwhelmingly as well for them. So I do think there is a real hunger and appetite around parks and recreation. So that would be an area that I would love resident input on in terms of how we might further support. And within that, think about TFAC and think about the cricket field came up as an example, and other sorts of amenities for our community. And of course, that can be operating, but also the capital needs that are part of that. Another thing is just bearing in mind with as we look about different options of a debt millage floating a bond, is right now we do know these are record low inflation rates and interest rates. So in terms of if you want to have a time in which you're going to float a bond, like this is as good a time as any to think about something like that. And debt millages are something that once they're paid off, they're done. They don't, differently than something that would be a dedicated millage would continue and go on. So I would love more information about that, especially as it intersects with quality of life and sort of parks and recreation, just to learn more. And of course, the priority is what residents have to say about this. And the last thing I will share is 2 other sort of funding ideas that I would love more information on from city management. And they're not a panacea in terms of bringing in tons of money to solve like TFAC and some of the funding challenges and capital needs that we have. But as I talk to various friends and family, those who've served in various functions in cities, a couple of things came to mind. First thing that was raised to me is that you have some municipalities who set up some sort of, I don't know the structure of it, but funds to be able to support a struggling municipal asset, such as, and the example given to me was a ski hill, a municipal ski hill, an enterprise fund that is struggling just like our TFAC and like Sanctuary Lake. And it's set up a fund in a way that someone could bequeath a portion of their estate to it. Again, it's not something that's going to bring tons of money, but that there are cases of municipalities who do set these sort of funding, these funds up to be able to allow that money in. And it also made me think of the possibility of like a cricket field, potentially getting grant dollars from a World Cricket Federation to be able to come into some sort of fund like this to support and to facilitate, just to enhance some different initiatives. And the second and last thing is something that Council Member Hamilton also brought up around the Downtown Development Authority. So something else I'm also aware of that I would love to have more information on is I'm aware that there are a number of cities in Michigan whereby the DDAs, Downtown Development Authorities in those cities, agree to support, to give a portion of their TIF, tax incremental financing revenue, to a public entity within its district. I believe Ann Arbor had an example, and I know another in my hometown whereby funds are support actually our public library, a portion of those. And the argument is that those funds are supporting a civic asset that brings and attracts people into a DDA space with the idea of keeping them in that space and spending more time to frequent restaurants and other things within that space. So it would be great if possibly we could seek some sort of consensus to, if it could be possible to have a report on some examples of other municipalities who have been able to partner with their downtown development authorities. And again, it's not necessarily a massive amount of money, but being able to find partnerships to support civic entities, because I know it is done in other cities in Michigan. So those are just a couple of areas that would love more research on, and some of where my thinking is around some very high level kind of priorities for the city.
Thank you, Councilmember Chairman Krenga, and I appreciate your creativity with bringing some different ideas to some finance. I think that's a good perspective to have. And I don't know, City Manager Miller, I'm, as far as seeking consensus to get some further information about DDA partnerships with the municipalities, and I don't know if there's consensus from council. To happy to look into that further. See one nodding head, couple, I see a couple, three. All right, four. I don't know if you can do that. It's a little bit, it might be a little abstract, and I don't have clear direction of that, but go ahead, Mark.
Mayor, I honestly don't think we even need consensus. In fact, I would rely on City Attorney Bloom. It's really a matter of what the law allows for. And then our plan would have to demonstrate what is permitted in the law.
And Mayor, if I may also add, our community center, actually, the community center has, the DDA has assisted with the community center and the construction of that as well.
I think that's great. I'll just add to that, and I know Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, you know, well after being on the DDA, I certainly would want full buy-in and cooperation with the DDA members. And Chairman Kurlik, for example, has been on for almost 25 years, I think, and I don't want him to think that City Council is coming in and directing or telling him what that board should be looking at. I know sometimes they're sensitive to that, as I learned in the previous experience. So, and I know that's not your intent at all, Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, but I just want to make sure that it's a communal conversation, decision, and discussion. Obviously, recognizing that council approves their budgets, but I certainly would want them to have ample opportunity to participate in those discussions as well. And so, Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig.
Yes, and to be clear, I'm not saying that this is the best thing for Troy. And that's why I thought maybe a piece that might summarize, because I thought about doing that research myself, calling up some different municipalities where this has happened and speaking to some city managers and finding out how it worked. Because what I'm hearing sometimes is it's operating expenses, is programming. It's not always more capital, as I believe the Civic Center was more about. So just to find some examples and just to see and to be able to partner with our DDA and get their reactions, but not to say it's for us, but just to see how it's worked in other communities and then put it on the table as something to see if we can move forward on.
Very good. Thank you. Next up is Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. What's always striking to me is the revenue story. Remember sitting 10 years ago, 11 years ago in budget study sessions as a resident in council chambers, in the council boardroom, and hearing from then city manager John Zerleg that we would not recover from the Great Recession until about 2020. And here we are in 2020, and those forecasts were spot on. And I remember at the time, there was a sense of disbelief when that forecast was given. At the time, that was when Troy started shifting to a 3-year rolling budget to help mitigate some of that. And it's a really good thing that we did. But what I continue to, even though I've been watching these study sessions for 10, 11 years or participating in them directly, is that essentially from a revenue perspective, while we are rising, it's a slow rise. And to me, it's essentially flat. So when I start looking at next year's budget or even the 3-year budget, I have to be very conservative in my mindset of how I want to approach expenditures. Because even though we've done really wonderful things like pass that 10-year library millage, which took the pressure off of our general fund, help supports that AAA bond rating, it's not enough to really be considered a windfall in terms of revenue. We have a lot of competing interests in terms of expenditures. I know we're going to talk more about it at the study session in 2 weeks, but the body cams for our police department is something that I find very compelling in terms of something I would want to pursue. It's the right thing for our residents. It's the right thing for our police department. There's mutual benefit to having them. And then there's the less glamorous things like our aging facilities that are constantly in need of repair. If residents, if you've been watching for the past month or two, you've heard a lot of discussions about the aquatic center, but we've also invested a lot of money into upgrading our public works building that have had some of the same garage doors, for example, for the past 40 years. And unfortunately, we have a lot of facilities that are in similar situations. And while it's not the most glamorous of expenditures. They're very, very necessary and very, very critical to making sure our city operates seamlessly, in that as a resident, you're not impacted. I'm very mindful, though, that residents, particularly because of the COVID situation, are dealing with two things. One, they may have some financial impact to their own pocketbook and have to be very mindful of what the city is perhaps going to suggest, if in fact one of the things we suggest are millages, dedicated millages. At the same time, because of the COVID situation, we have more people using our parks and public facilities more than ever, and there is a great appreciation for them. Whether or not, you know, their financial situation is improved, they understand the benefit of it. And so what I'd like to see, or what I'd like to explore further at our next study session is, you know, what does a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan look like for, you know, to address our aging facilities, what that could look like, what it could look like for our green space in our parks and rec, what it means for our public works, and to understand what it would take to get there, and what trade-offs do we have. Do we need to you know, increase our revenue, or do we just have to prioritize things in such a way that we can do everything that we want to do? It's just going to take longer to get there. I think the key to all of it will be our community engagement, which I think city staff, they did a spectacular job with the library millage, and under really challenging COVID conditions, of engaging the community and having that dialogue and having that discussion. And I anticipate that's going to be a very critical piece in how we move forward with the next budget cycle in the spring, in terms of prioritizing what amenities we may want to enhance, and what things we may want to enhance, but perhaps not for 2 or 3 more years, because it's just not in the cards and it's just not in the forecast. And so the other thing that I'd like to understand a little bit better is maybe next steps in terms of community engagement. Where do we go from here to really get our residents' input on how to move forward? Because we know, you know, the Aquatic Center is very important to the community. We heard over 200 emails or public comment about it. We heard dozens of feedback on cricket fields, but we really need to understand what can our budget support and in what time frame. So that's what I'm looking at in our next session, and going into our spring study sessions as well.
Very good, Council Member Abraham. Solid stuff, as always. So, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, you're up. Perfect. You're frozen for a second, Teresa. I don't know if you can. It's going to come back.
Oh, okay. Always when I talk. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
I swear it's always when I talk. I don't know what's up. But anyways, first of all, thank you to all of the city staff that put this presentation together. And I really, really appreciate, you know, the foresight and the forethought of trying to really get ahead of the budget before budget crunch time is. And so I think that this is really, really helpful for us and for the city as a whole. And one question that I had is there any anticipated support from like a state level increased support? Because I have been, you know, involved in, well, not involved, but listening to the Michigan Municipal League meetings. And I know that a lot of municipalities across the state are dealing with a lot of budgetary crunches like we are. and this has been a problem, and that they are looking to potentially, that the state might be able to provide a little bit more support for local municipalities. Is that anything that you've heard? Yeah.
City Manager Miller, would you like to address that?
Yeah, I will give you my gut impression and then turn it over to Rob because he actually deals with the Treasury Department. Don't expect much from the state. Rob, your official.
Yeah, they're usually a horrible partner, and that's been my experience. And the governor just mentioned that they don't have the money to help the unemployed. I don't know if you saw that today, actually. So she's banking on more federal support.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, but either way, I know that that obviously a lot of other local municipalities are dealing with a lot of this as well as we are. But yeah, as far as millages and potential millages in that regard, it does. I think for residents, I don't know what the appetite will be for another millage, given the fact that we just passed the library millage. But I do think that community engagement is very, very key. I think that our decision to move forward with the library millage and the rate that we put it at, I think was made easy because we knew what the feedback was from residents. And we had a good feeling about, what residents wanted. And so it helped us to make that decision very easy. So I think that whatever, we decide to move forward with, it has to be a lot of community engagement and understanding what our residents want. I do think that the more focused the millage, I think that the more likely it seems that residents may go for it, because if residents have an understanding of what their tax dollars are going and they have a tangible, they can just see it, like with the library, for example, what does 1 get you? What does 1.1 get you? And they have a good understanding of what their tax dollars are doing for them. I think that there's maybe going to be a lot more, appetite, or people may be happier to move forward with something like that. I do agree that we have to support our public safety. We have to invest in our public safety if we want, the best police officers and volunteer firefighters. We have to show them that they are important and invest in them. That's important for our community. It's obviously these decisions are not easy. But I do feel that what Councilmember Hamilton and Abraham said, it would be very helpful as well for us to see kind of those different levels. If we, X amount of dollars will get us this, X amount of dollars will get us that, so that we can tangibly see, what the next year, 2 years, 3 years would look like with the current funding that we have, or versus if we were able to have additional funding, what it would look like. So I think that would be helpful for us as well. So those are some of my thoughts. And everyone, all my other fellow council members brought up some other very good points.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks. The downside of going towards the end is that you run the risk of either being too repetitive and yet I'm going to do it anyway. So we all know that, right? But I appreciate what your thoughts are right there. A couple of you said you wanted, and a couple of you have said it, and I know we all feel it, but Mark and Bob and Rob, we really do appreciate this proactive, comprehensive start to our look at the budget for next year. We will approve a budget for 21 to 22 about 6 months from now. And, this is my 5th year. I'm going to my 5th year as part of this council. And I've never had this much input or opportunity for input as I do tonight. And I know that's this early. And I know it's because I know, Mark, you came to us several weeks ago and said, hey, I'm thinking about trying to engage you earlier on this. And I mean, what a fantastic idea. So thank you for doing that. Obviously, the the presentation itself is very comprehensive, and I know you have a lot of those those numbers around, but to pull them together and put them in a format that, one, we can see them and absorb them in an easier fashion, I know is a whole other level of work, and I appreciate you for doing that very much. And I do look forward to, again, this is the start of the conversation. We've got 6 months before we have approved finally, but knowing that, not my first, I think 2016 budget cycle, I can kind of remember in April getting a proposed budget, and that was kind of it. What we saw was what we got. There wasn't a lot of conversation. There was things that were in there that, it's a much different atmosphere now. So I appreciate it very much. And I saw Edna and Ellen kind of nod their heads pretty rapidly too. So I appreciate that. I look at things a lot like pretty much everybody else does, with different experiences coming at it, of course. But and you'll hear some of the same words. But I think our residents look for our public safety aspect of our budget. They look for the quality of life. They look for I think they appreciate our facilities, although they don't always think necessarily about our facilities right away. But that's a big part of what they look for in our budget, and infrastructure, obviously. And if you have that four-legged stool or table, I mean, those are the things that prop up our budget and make our city attractive to the residents that come here, the businesses that move in here, and the visitors that we have on a daily basis. So we always need to be focused on balancing all those interests, recognizing that at times there's going to be more of a pull, maybe a little bit towards infrastructure based on needs or the quality of life, because that seems to be what's really important to people right now. Or certainly as we look at, our 56 or 57 city-owned buildings and facilities that we got a binder, 2-inch binder or 3-inch binder, probably 2 years now ago, that shows substantial needs over the next several years, millions of dollars. I mean, I think it was over $20 million based on then. We've approached some of those already, but those needs are always going to be there. So we can't be, I think as a council, we can never be too heavily focused in one of those legs of that table, right? And that's, I think, the risk we run when we hear substantial public comment in one direction, and it seems like we're taking our eyes off the ball in the other areas. And I know we don't want to do that. I know we certainly don't mean to do that, but we have to keep remembering all these things. When we talk about quality of life, that to me, I think it was first mentioned by Ellen this evening, and then it's come through a couple times, but we talk about whether it's the aquatic center or trails and pathways, the parks and recreations, a potential cricket field. That is definitely something our residents have been clamoring for more and more over the past 5 years that I've been on council. I see more and more of a drive for it. I see as our trails and pathways begin to, we're almost finished with segment 2, and we see more people utilizing them, especially because of COVID, and we see people appreciating them for what they are. Sometimes it's very difficult for people to imagine what that trail is going to be like, and they can't imagine, they say they want it, but it's questionable as to funding and all of that. But then once they have a mile or a couple miles of trails to go out on and utilize, they realize the benefit to their lives and to the city as a whole. The aquatic center, as you know, I mean, as of right now, obviously for the next couple of years, we have to keep status quo and do the repairs necessary based on the feedback I think we received from the residents. What that looks like in the future, Councilmember Erickson Galt talked about a long-range plan first. She had to go first, so she got that one in, which that's so important. And we've struggled with that civic center property. I mean, probably for as long as the city's been in existence, but it was, the past few years, especially 2017, we know that there was a charter amendment and there was the opportunity to look at a development project. And, that got away from us on council, got away from the residents and turned into something that it shouldn't have been. But part of that plan, part of that process, I learned something very valuable, and that residents do want us to invest in our civic center property, and they want it to be used for, community gathering spaces. They want it to be park-like. They maybe want to see, they want to see the aquatic center taken care of. Perhaps we look at, our library, part of it will be 50 years old next year. We just approved a millage, which is going to fully fund it operationally and definitely invest a lot of money in taking care of it. But, at some point, is that library building, the pendulum will hit the balance, the scales will get out of balance again. And, we're going to be throwing, again, more good money after bad. So, these long-term projects of what we do with the buildings on that property, what we do with that property in general, I strongly believe we need to be looking at semi-regularly on council, whether it's through study sessions, whether through it's some sort of commission that, again, relooks at the plans we've had in the past and modernizes them to where we are today. We had the 2020 Futures Plan way back. Here we are in 2020. It's time to figure out what the next, I talked about this before, but the next 10 years or even 20 years, what the community wants that space to look like. And once we know a little bit of that, recognizing opinions change, circumstances change, but some fundamentals usually stay pretty steady, we have to look at how we deal with the funding of that. We've talked a lot about taxes tonight. Right now, I'll tell you, I don't think it's a good time to talk about new millages. We just passed a millage for our library. We're in the middle of COVID, but there's so many unknowns. We've got small businesses in our city that are suffering. A lot of them are resident owned who are in this city. We're in the middle of another shutdown right now. I know there's a lot of concerns and anxiety. And the idea of raising taxes or even talking about it, it does make me cringe a little bit. And I know this council well enough at this point, and city management as well, to know that no one is talking about raising taxes right now. Number one, like Ellen said, it has to go to a vote of the people before anything like that. But number two, we're not looking at doing anything like that right now. But if we were to look at additional revenue enhancers at some point, I think the focus in this city should really be on very specific and targeted projects, whether that's floating bonds for facilities or for parks or something. I'm hesitant to move our budget system as a whole away from what it's traditionally been to a series of many different operating millages for different purposes. I don't know that we need to go that extreme into doing something like that. We've got that with the library, but let's try to work with what we have and focus on targeted projects if we can. That said, community engagement, as has been said by everybody, is going to be so important in figuring out what it is our residents want. I know, Bob, you gave us a kind of a preview of what our survey is going to be looking at and how that's going to work. That looks very exciting. And I think that'll do a lot to give us, again, that initial information to then begin the conversations out in the community to see what matters to people. Recognizing that what sounds good to people today may look very different in the middle of winter, depending on what's going on with the economy, with COVID and everything. Those opinions are going to change, and we need to make sure, and I'm sure a reputable survey company is going to be prepared for that as well. But all of these things are our priorities as council members in this city. And it's difficult for me to say, okay, I think we need to put this above this. But I do think that it's important that the things that come up frequently, like the Aquatic Center, like looking into the cricket, it's been brought up in the past, but it's coming back again, recognizing that is going to be an initial big capital investment, and then there's maintenance on top of it. Those numbers really do need to be looked at. But, and again, an overall plan, that is the priority that I think we need. I think in the middle of a crisis that we are right now, we should be very cautious about doing anything too big and too bold until we know where we're going to land on this. But we need to be prepared to, run out of that gate when things look a little bit normal and go on with the business as usual, so we don't lose any more time than we already have. I'd like to see us look a little bit status quo for this next year, in the sense that let's be smart with it. I mean, we have a healthy unassigned fund balance right now. That's there for a reason, not to be used, but to supplement anything we may not get from the state. And we need to be very cautious in what we do. That said, the past 5 years that I've seen budgets come through, we've been able to make investments in places that are important to our community. And I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do with that. And, very rarely, frankly, have we had a meeting where we haven't, someone at the top said, we can't afford to do that, Councilmember Baker or Mayor Baker. I mean, we've been able to make these projects work, and we've had these budget amendments because of good financial planning in the past. I think my number one priority right now is we're in the middle of a crisis, and we know that we've got a lot of issues potentially coming up with our infrastructure and our facilities in this city. Let's make sure that we leave the same legacy for future councils that they've left for us by being very smart with our tax dollars, very smart in planning with the buildings that we do have, so that we can try to even all this out. So that said, I think everything everyone's mentioned tonight as far as what they'd like to see at the next meeting and beyond, I'm in complete agreement with. I think that's important to talk about those next steps. But it would be great to see, at some point, and I know we'll get there, Mark, where there is some, once we kind of lay out what has to be paid for, what's left, what's going to be available to look at special projects, what's a reasonable use of maybe some capital money or some unassigned fund balance that can supplement for one-time projects, whether that's cricket, whether that's to solidify up VFIP, which I think is extremely important. But, to me, it's kind of like, let's pay all of our bills first and then see what we can spend for vacation, right, as the household. And that's how I look at it. So I know we'll get to that point. This is an early preliminary step in that. But I want us to do right by our residents by continuing the tradition of conservative budgeting, conservative use of their tax dollars, recognizing that, yes, our library received overwhelming support for a 10-year millage, but that doesn't necessarily translate to anything else. Our library has a very specific role, and it's been 10 to 12 years of, think about all the talk and all the community action that's taken place regarding our library. That doesn't necessarily translate to any other additional debt millage or operating millage, and we need to be really mindful of that. So that's where I'm at. I, again, appreciate you, Mark, Bob, and Rob, and all the staff that went into putting this together for us tonight, some who are probably on but not showing their faces and some who are watching at home. It really does mean a lot to me as the mayor and to us as council to know that you've got our backs coming into this cycle and you really want to engage us and have us be a part of this, recognizing that we're the ones that have more interaction with the residents and can bring that information to you and provide a better end product for the city as a whole. So thank you. I appreciate it. And I don't know, Mark, if you had any closing thoughts that you wanted to speak to as it relates to where we were tonight, or any takeaways.
Mayor, not a lot, just that I have taken a lot of notes and we'll come back and answer questions and provide more information. And I think we'll have a good session. I think we're really going to need to inform council how we develop the capital plan, because we plan out 6 years of our expenditures and how those decisions are made and how then it's all synthesized into the capital plan. So I think we'll have a good meeting in 2 weeks.
Great. We'll have a regular meeting in 1 week. So tune in 1 week, everybody. And as a reminder, next on the agenda is other business. I don't see there being any other business unless anyone has any to suddenly ring up at this point. I don't think so. As a reminder to everybody, please stay safe out there. We know what the numbers are doing here in Michigan. We know that we're approaching a new temporary shutdown. And we ask that, frankly, I'm hearing from a lot of people in the community that didn't necessarily have any direct experience with COVID before, but I probably talked to 10 people today who told me, you know what, someone very close to them is either in the hospital with COVID or they know somebody who's just tested positive. So it's definitely out there in a lot more numbers than it was, and the tests are there to prove that and back that up. So please be safe out there. Recognize that our healthcare heroes, our frontline workers, our first responders, they're still going out there to keep us safe, to provide food for us at the grocery store, to do the things that we need them to do. And we should be extra kind and extra thankful for the service they're providing us, because they're making a difference in our lives at a time when it's putting them at extra risk. So thank you, healthcare heroes, frontline responders, and first responders. We appreciate you as well. And with that, we are adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mayor.